Let's go. Welcome to another episode of the OoruLabs podcast from Bengaluru. Ever complain how bad our cities are, how bad your commute is? You'll get to hear from people who are working to solve these problems in their own way. This is your weekly soapbox for urban sustainability. I am Satya Sankaran. A recent report noted about 30% of the total waste generated in India is not collected at all. 70% of that goes to a landfill. 60% of that landfill is organic waste such as leftover food, peelings of vegetables, livestock manure, etc. But remember, 30% of waste is not collected at all. Where do you think those go? Probably on the streets. How about the landfill? How much can cities dump in the neighboring villages without processing? We will ask all these questions to Sandhya Narayanan. She has been working on waste management for more than a decade now. She is the founding member of the Solid Waste Management Roundtable, which is a collective of solid waste management practitioners working on promoting decentralized, sustainable waste management and inclusive livelihoods out of Bengaluru. They have been working with the city corporation to improve their capacity, establish standards, and try and make some progress in what we are doing with waste. Welcome to the show, Sandhya.
Hi, thank you.
Why are our cities dirty?
I know everyone loves asking that question, and it's always a very attractive, big, bold, sensational thing to ask. But unfortunately, the answers end up being very boring. And I don't think anybody really wants to listen to it because it becomes long, complex, and rambling. I wish I could answer that question in a single word or a few sentences, but I mean, those of us who have been working in the area of civic issues, I think, know and completely understand that no civic issue is really unidimensional. Um, there are so many aspects to it which makes it so complex and probably, which is why a lot of us just give up seeking the right answer somewhere down the way, saying, hey, this is getting too much for me. I can't deal with it. But let me kind of try and, see if I can simplify it. We have been kind of looking at, the concept of dirty. I mean, that in itself is actually interesting because what we view as clean or dirty in the urban setup in a city, in a metro particularly, will be very different from when you go down to a rural area or a village or a smaller town and you ask them what is dirty. Actually, their viewpoint is very different. They're okay with things, because they're used to seeing that on a normal basis in their environments. I think over a period of time, we've also kind of become very antsy about what we see in our streets. It's probably the excessive clean or the excessive, visuals of these amazing cities that we see when we go outside somewhere. Whether we can really cut paste that image and put it to a country like India is something that maybe we have to also think about. What is our concept or what is our perception of dirty? So I'm not trying to absolve anyone of the problem. I'm just saying it helps to also put that into perspective. Um, Also, I think one of the things that we have, found as a very important part of the visual of cleanliness or being dirty is the design. Very often, if you have, had an opportunity to travel abroad, you'll find the first thing that hits you is the way the footpaths and the streets look. There is a certain visual ability for you to see right through. It's clean. There is no clutter on a footpath. You do not come across OFC cables, overgrown roots. The trees are, kind of absolutely pruned and kept in a certain way. You don't have too many blocks on the footpath when you're walking, transformer boxes, telephone boxes, all of that kind of a thing. So if you think back on your own street, you'll find that there are so many impediments on the footpath. All of that adds to the concept of clutter and therefore the problem of design. And therefore, it's so much more easier for things to start attracting littering and things to start attracting, accumulation of material. And then if it's not cleared, obviously it ends up looking dirty. So I think that at a very non-related to waste management kind of way are a couple of points that I'm trying to bring out. And of course, there is the very all-encompassing thing which we all keep talking about is, we want to achieve a Singapore, which means that they do not even allow a flight to, buzz past you without permission. So are we, ready for that kind of policing in some sense? The social behavior, we have a concept of allowing inclusiveness where we allow vendors in our streets, where we allow people to sell things. So I think that is again another very important reason for us to consider in this definition of dirty. Because the more number of people you have doing activities on the streets, obviously it's likely to become dirty. I mean, it's a inhuman task to think back on when you've last traveled outside, and you'll realize that you've never seen street vendors anywhere. Whereas the beauty of what we do is really that we are inclusive and we allow vendors everywhere on the streets. So that said, then coming to the real waste management part of it and the civic responsibility of what that role is also there. But before I touch that, I also want to come into the littering part of it.
Mm.
Littering all over the world, I think, is a problem. It's not to say that Indians are dirtier or, some other countrymen are, less dirtier and are cleaner. I think it's about facilitating littering by providing spaces where they can throw it. And more importantly, that's where we overlap with, or the touch points happen with the civic bodies being able to come and clear or remove waste. But again, like I told you, because of the problem of clutter, you'll find
Mm.
most often that the litter is not restricted to a dustbin. It is
Mm.
invariably always outside the dustbin, which means the job of street sweeping, what we call it, is a very, very important job. Then again, it touches back into design. Think about your
Yeah.
street. When your Paurakarmikas come every day to clean, are your streets really capable of being clean? Because everybody has two cars parked outside, and some of the cars are never moved. And there is always stuff under it. Are we expecting then people to actually clean around that, or how are we expecting vehicles to be moved? And since all parking happens on the streets, you'll know that, even on morning walks, we have a problem, right? Everything starts early and there is no place to walk because the parking starts. So how's the cleaning expected to happen? In
Sure.
other countries, we see mechanical sweepers coming in. In our roads are not fit for mechanical sweeping. They don't have the smooth finish that is needed. There is, gaping holes. The machines can't access them. So this is what I mean being in the realm of design. There are inherent issues, and that is why it is not also easy to solve some of those things, because we are not able to deploy machinery or mechanical sweepers, or even if we put on people, it is not solving the problem. So I think the visual optics of seeing an aesthetic city is a lot to do with design.
Mm.
It's, yes, to some extent to do with also behavior of people. But I think that changes when people see a clean place, they tend not to litter. When people see a road which is well maintained, they tend not to. I'll give you an example of the St. Mark's Road area, which has the
Mm.
so called tender shore roads, and visualize another area which has not even a footpath. People's behavior changes the minute they step onto an environment where there is a better footpath or a better road, vis-a-vis another place where it's even difficult for you to navigate yourself. So I think it's a large factor of design, and we are seeing a lot of improvement around it. But we know that it's going to be a long time before our roads and our footpaths hit that level of uniformity and presentation where it invites people to be better behaved.
I can empathize with that because this is the classic broken windows parable of Bastia. If you keep things dirty, people will think it's okay to make it even more dirty and keep piling on it. So, dirty has two connotations. One is visual aesthetics, is what one of the things you talked about. Cables dangling, people park haphazardly, and there is no geometry to the road surfaces and to the curbstones and things like that, right? Visually, the city doesn't look like your house the way you keep it clean inside your house. You want a certain level of gentrification inside the house and not have to have everything lying all over. But we don't lay our cities outside our houses like that. We don't take care
Absolutely.
of it a similar way. But that's the visual look and feel, how you design the whole place. And of course, like you said, that has a bearing on litter and waste, right? If you look at that, if you narrow it down to waste, and from a city to, we are all consumers at the end of the day. We all eat, do things, buy things, and they have to go somewhere at end of life or not, sometimes very early. What is the journey of waste of an individual and then of a city, right? How does the city see this journey of waste? Who are all the people involved in this journey? From the moment we throw something, where does it go? And it just help unpack that for people. Of course, everybody throws their waste, but they don't know what happens afterwards. It's just like a
Sure.
black box. I gave it away, I did what you said I should do. Now I don't know what's going on. I don't get to hear of it. I don't even know where it goes. And all those numbers I reeled off in the beginning was something that I got off of a report. You might correct me if I'm wrong, but nobody knows what's happening. Can you unpack that for us?
So before I touch upon what happens to the waste that we generate and all of that, I continue the why are cities
Hmm.
dirty with the part that how are cities handling their waste.
Hmm.
So why are cities dirty also comes back to the fact that you will find when you travel. I'm going to take just kind of have you think about your journey in various parts of India. You'll find that there are various parts where you may have come across those big, large, containers that are there. Even those of us who recall how Bangalore used to be when we were growing up, we had cement rings
Yeah, I remember it
in
at the
various
street
places.
corners. Yeah.
Yeah, street corners. And those were expected to kind of be the points where waste was collected. But over a period of time, with a better understanding, and more importantly, because of the huge increase in population, also because of the fact that civic bodies are now able to afford much more than what they were able to afford 2 decades back or whatever. There is more money in there with them for them to be able to do things better. The concept of public bins has gone away. And yet, going back to your previous question as to why a city is dirty, is because we tend to see large accumulation of uh, waste which is grouped up in a particular place, which obviously is waiting to be collected and cleared and taken away. It's not litter. So there
Mhm.
are two parts to the whole thing, and all of us, I think, understand what is litter and which is the large accumulation of household waste or shop waste in a market area or things like that. Why is that happening? Now, that is definitely more unidimensional. It's not so much to do with social behavior. It's more to do with the fact that there is a complete gap or deficiency in the service delivery that is being given by the municipalities, and that is wholly and squarely to be blamed on the way in which our service delivery is happening. We can, most often when you start this conversation with officials, they'll say, but public ಕೇಳಲ್ಲ, ಎಷ್ಟು ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೂ ಯಾರು ಒಪ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಲ್ಲ, ಅವ್ರು ಎಲ್ರು ಬಂತು ಎಸಿತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅಂಡ್ ಅವರೆಲ್ಲ ದ ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಕ್ ಒನ್ ಮರ್ಸಿಡೀಸ್ ಬೆಂಜ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗ್ತಾರೆ, ಬಟ್ ವಿಂಡೋ ರೋಲ್ ಮಾಡಿಬಿಟ್ಟು ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಬಂದು ಪ್ಲಾಸ್ಟಿಕ್. ವೈ ಆರ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಡೂಯಿಂಗ್ ದಟ್? The question to be asked, and if the official is honest, the question to be asked is, why are people doing it? Nobody wants to go out walking around with a garbage bag in their hand on the way to work and drop it off somewhere. Nobody intends doing it. The last thing on my mind when I'm stepping out of my home is to hold a garbage bag in my hand and find a suitable place for me to dispose it. It's a nuisance. Why would I want to do it? So if we were honest as officials and willing to look at it. The problem is because obviously the collection is not happening from their doorstep, and that is the mandate of the cities, that they have to collect from people's doorsteps, whether it is a shop, whether it is a market, or whether it is a home. Till such time that we have municipalities being honest about it, there's always going to be this blame game, and they're going to be blaming public, and as if public is this nameless, faceless mass of people who will never fall in line, which is not true. We know people do fall in line. You will have an errant 15%, but we are not talking about that. We are talking about the broad 80-90% of people. So coming back to why is that happening is really when this whole story of waste management unfolds, as to therefore then how do we handle this waste. Is it that mass that we see lying on the streets? Is there a better way to deal with it? So fortunately, over a period of time, especially in the last 15 years, um, a lot of work has been done in India, where thanks to the huge amount of engagement from people, there has been a breakdown of understanding of how do we actually attack this problem, because we did have rules. There have been rules and acts which have been floating around in the system from 2000 onwards, but they were too up there, and there was no practicality as an association of what can I do with vis-a-vis those rules. That whether the I is me as an individual, or whether the I is me as a city, both were not clear. The cities did not know what they had to do, and people did not know, were not told, or did not have idea what they had to do. Fortunately, even if you do not follow too much of waste management on a daily, I think that somewhere in the consciousness you will realize that things have improved. There has been a lot of rules that have come in thanks to Swachh Bharat in the last from 2015 onwards. It has become a much more of a public thing to solve for, take pride in it, all of those things. So it has been bringing up a lot of associated subject matter. I lost track of what your original question was, but
It
I
was about the journey of waste. Maybe you can also, maybe you can start with the SWMRT journey itself, because that was a good point you were bringing. There were people who were involved in trying to streamline this process because everything was up in the air. Why did you guys do this? And then we can come back to the journey of waste. Maybe you can weave it into this
it's
answer as
kind
well.
of intertwined, yeah.
Correct. So let's talk about the solid waste management roundtable. Why
I
did you
think
set it
we
up?
started off with wanting to wake up municipalities, because I think many of us realize exactly what I described a little while ago, that there was something to be done, but none of us was clear on what is to be done. And there were few of us who were, because of the roles that we were taking in. And interestingly, the formation of apartments has led to a lot more people having to take a role in terms of community management, which was not there earlier. All of us were individual houses, and we very often did not look at us unless you were in a layout. There was no real need for you to address a city problem. But an interesting thing that came about with apartments getting formed is that, like it or not, we had to now start solving for community based living. And a few of us, had to take a role on stepping up. And that's how I think also we've had a large number of people stepping out into outside their homes to actually deal with larger issues, because they've had to also do it in their immediate communities, as being part of management committee members and things like that. So we found over a period of time that apartments were struggling more than the individual homes, because there was a sudden accumulation of waste in a particular place. We started realizing, oh my God, there is a lot of waste lying here. Now, what's to be done with this? And that's how my journey started, because we were 60 homes, and we found suddenly one particular week that 60 bags were getting added constantly, trash bags. And the children were playing cricket, and the ball would go into those bags, and the boys would happily go and scramble. And we were cringing because we were worried about rats, we were worried about disease, we were worried about all of that. And we had no way of figuring out who's supposed to come and take these bags away. And that's when we started asking questions. Okay, I'm putting it out. Now what? Who's supposed to come and take these bags away? And why is it not getting taken away? And then for the first time, I think some of us started talking to the sweepers on the street who were till then nameless and faceless. We had no idea what they were doing. And then, the questioning kind of led us from one person to another, and the pointing started, Auru Nalala, Auru Madbeku, who's that Auru Madbeku kind of journey led us to understand some things about, okay, there is a truck that comes and they take it away. Why is the truck not coming? Who's in charge of the truck? Who's driving it? So those questions led us to realize that there are so many glass ceilings there, and our understanding was at the very base of the pyramid and very inadequate, and we had to discover what was really happening there. In that journey, we constantly, some of us innovated and did creative things on our own to solve the problems of our apartments. And I think the apartment community, in some sense, has been an important pioneer in breaking through this waste issue, because we found so many champions who were working in apartments, and there would be random news articles that came out, and more of us started getting connected. And we found that, okay, many of us want to solve this problem, but it makes sense for all of us to work together. And then that's how the roundtable was formed. Quite literally, a group of people who wanted to solve the problems in their neighborhood or in their apartments, and who went beyond just their apartments to a few steps further, and then hit, kind of roadblocks and challenges at the community level, and then decided, hey, we should all kind of get together and do this. So we were just a group of people, and the differentiating thing there was that when you read out the definition of who we are as SWMRT, the differentiating thing there was that we were not just citizens trying to solve a problem. We were also practitioners.
Mm.
That is, we started realizing that there were certain important things that we had to do, and we started practicing that. When we started practicing it, we found, how can I make this easier? How can I improve the design of it? It doesn't help for me to have five different waste bins all around my house. I'm not interested in doing that. But what if we collapse the same thing and put one bag which will collect dry waste because the bin is constantly overflowing? How did these ideas come about? Because people were doing it themselves and realized that, hey, this is a smarter way to do it. Then we started sharing those ideas with others, and that's how the concept of dry waste in a bag started. There was this one apartment which then went about saying, incidentally, that was the Renaissance Park in Malleshwaram, which said, the bin is not working out, let's do bags. And a single bag is not enough. And by the time we were all already a bit into the whole consumerism kind of thing, where supermarkets were there, and we were buying more as households and therefore throwing more. So we have to do paper separate, plastic separate, metal separate. If I combine all of this, there's nobody to take this away. By then, we have to solve for who's going to take it away. So we hit the thing about, okay, a scrap dealer doesn't like to come and take our household waste. Who's the person who will come and who's willing to take away household waste? He's willing to come and take newspapers, but he's not willing to come and take the packaging. We didn't realize at that point in time, which we do now, that it was because of the inherent value of the packaging not being attractive to scrap dealers, and that's why they were not taking it away. But that, we got smarter about it in our journey because we were all practitioners. We were able to solve for problems because we were practitioners. So, coming to the journey of waste in the city, while we were solving for problems at a apartment level, we found that converging it at a higher level was solving it for it at the city level. So what we were finding as solutions, and if it worked at the apartment level, we were able to extrapolate it and say, okay, 10x apartments, and it solves at the city level. And that's how really the policy started building. And then we needed someone to listen to us. It was not enough that just a few of us were, coming up with these ideas. Someone needs to listen to it and help us to implement it at the higher level. We were, able to find out that there is a consumer grievance court called the Lok Adalat. Till then, we had never even heard of these things. And they invited us. We were very, very fortunate to meet Mr. Yalapareddy, who is, I think, in some sense, the man with eyes all around his head and looking out for civic issues. And, he was mainly in the area of greening. But when he found that he liked what we were saying and that we were facing roadblocks of policy, he introduced us to the Lok Adalat. And the Lok Adalat was this fabulous experience where we actually had a High Court judge who was sitting, listening to the problems of what we came in as citizens, the problems we were facing. And on the other side was the entire bunch of officers from the civic agencies, whether it was BESCOM, Lakes, Aish, the Ayurvedic one, of course, the BBMP, and the Pollution Control Board. And we were like completely blown. We were looking for an opportunity to speak to guys, and suddenly we actually had an entire hall with officers on the one side, and we were about 10 or 20 of us together on the other side. And we had an opportunity to place our problems, and we had a judge who would mediate the conversations and then finally give directions. At that time, we were novices. We didn't even know how you go into a court and speak. We were not even clear on how we have to address the judge. But here was this platform which allowed us to do it, walk straight out of the streets, come into a room and speak about our problems. So we had to start taking ourselves a little more seriously. We realized, hey, look, this is an opportunity. We can't sound foolish. If we're going in there and talking about something, and if we're saying that this needs to be solved in a particular way, we better do our homework and we better go in with information. So we started learning about it. We started talking to more people, finding understanding who are the players. So, because then we realized the minute you go and talk about it in the city level, there is equality, there is inclusiveness, there is equity, there is a whole bunch of things which till then we had never bothered about because we were only trying to solve our problem. And suddenly we had to be, very aware that if I do something, I cannot say don't have street vendors because they're littering, because that is impinging on their right to be on the streets. This was a very harsh learning for us. Till then, we did not know. Till Nalini Shekhar joined our group, we thought we could solve the problem by just having companies come in and pick up the dry waste, and hey, these guys will come and take it away, and our problem is solved. She gave us a very rude awakening. She said, no, don't you dare take out waste pickers from the streets. We said, who are waste pickers? And then we realized that these are people that we've been seeing on the streets. And I personally used to think that they were beggars. And I think a lot of people along with me had that same opinion. And then in our learning and our understanding, we realize no, these are people who are actually picking up what that Radiwala doesn't want to take or the scrap dealer doesn't want to take. These are the people who are finding value in it, taking it somewhere and selling it. Hey, these guys are the answer to our problem. They're willing to take that dry waste that we're generating and which we are struggling because we don't have a scrap dealer to deal with. Will these guys take our waste? So Nalini Shekhar said, yes, they will, but they have to be organized. So then started her journey with Hasrudala, where she started organizing the waste pickers, who then became a very important part of for us as apartment dwellers or as household people, and for the city, because there was this bunch of people who were willing to touch and handle the waste that we were throwing out, and who were willing to do the work that we did not know who would solve for that. So that started, so we had to place that in the Lok Adalat, and we were able to get the Lok Adalat to address that. And that's how dry waste collection centers were born. It started from a need to fix our problem where we need to have a identity like the scrap shop, but it was center where it would not handle things that a scrap shop deals with, and would have waste pickers who will handle that particular thing. And that's how the BWCC or the dry waste collection centers were formed. And then we, of course, worked on a little bit of economics, and those are all other stories. I don't want to get into it. And then we placed it before the Lok Adalat, and they actually mandated that in the interest of improving the waste management for the city, every ward needs to have a dry waste collection center. Not just that, they would have to be managed by waste pickers. So we had solved a problem, we were also inclusive about it. And now the city had to kind of take it up and assign places where they would do it. But before that was the important journey of segregation of waste, which is, I think, has been the single most important act that everyone can do at whatever scale they touch waste in, as a single household or as a city level. And if we do it, it is the real way to find a solution for waste management. The Lok Adalat appreciated that. And because we had gone into this practitioner mode and we were able to say, Your Honor, in our homes, we are 50 of us who are doing it and we are all doing it fine. It's not a problem. Our families are able to understand it. Our maids are able to understand it. Your Honor, please make this a law, because it is not unrealistic to expect that more people should be able to segregate their waste in their homes. It is not the job of the BBMP to do it, it is our job. Probably that was the first time that the BBMP also found that there is a sharing of responsibility. Till then, everybody was just bashing them up for not doing the right thing. And suddenly, here was this approach where we were saying, hey, you guys are not the ones responsible. We are the ones at source responsible for giving you the well segregated waste. And then your job starts. As to why our cities are dirty, if I can blame my civic agencies for not picking up waste, but there is a step before that. If we are really honest, I have to blame myself for actually choosing to put waste in a cover and going out and throwing it. It starts with me. So I can say the doorstep, my collection is not happening. But then today, at this point in time, there are options for us to actually manage all waste or most waste at our household level without being dependent on an agency to come and take it away. And I hope you will cover that in your subsequent podcasts through composting
I will.
and through sustainable living and reduction of packaging and bioenzymes and how to have green events and green festivals. I mean, it just is a plethora of subjects,
I know.
all of which depends upon behavior.
And I do believe that. So I will do a series, like I mentioned before we started the recording, is that I want to do a whole series on the waste thing because it's quite important. So two, three things I can relate to after from an outsider as a consumer. After SWMRT, I heard about you guys quite a while ago, and one of the things I realized was the segregation piece. When I went to other cities as early as 2 years ago, maybe now it has changed because everybody else is trying to do it, but Bengaluru was early on in this whole segregation game. And when I went to Delhi and Chennai and many other cities, I said, what is segregation? We just put everything in that bin. So me and my kids would go there and ask, where's the wet waste bin? Where's the dry waste bin? There's no such thing. Just put it all in the trash. That's when we realized we had adopted segregation in our minds quite early on. At least a good percentage of local people who have been hearing SWMRT and your team members talk about it and have been involved in it, that came across very strongly, both from BBMP through you and you guys doing a lot of events and a lot of noise around that. It's ingrained in my kids now that they look for a dry waste bin and they look for a wet waste bin. It is a habit. They ask for it wherever they go. And that's a very important step. Of course, we can proceed to do more. The second thing also is you talked about all of you being practitioners. And I think SWMRT has been a unique incubation engine of sorts. At least some of your people have put money where your mouth is and are actually either building sustainable products or working with different segments in the waste to see how they can be made economically feasible for a lot of people to have a livelihood in that and make sense of it. So I'd like to come to two of these things. One is segregation is a complex topic. I myself have tried many different times and sometimes it slips by and it doesn't happen quite well, though my mother continues to do it on our behalf. Uh, it is complex. It needs help. It needs the ability for someone to distinguish and do the composting piece separately. Segregation is not a problem. Actually, it is the composting. But if you look at all the dry waste centers that have come out and all the wet waste processing that is happening, more and more people are saying we need to locally compost things. We need to locally do it in the ward level or whatever. But I've seen a few people say that no, it is smelly, it is not good, it is not this. Maybe they're doing it wrong. Maybe they are. We'll cover the details in different things. Do you think segregation can go forward? Composting can go forward? Is there more work to be done there? And then if you can then come across to the BBMP side of things. Is 100% collection achievable? Is it, I don't know what 100% collection really means. Will we not have the Mercedes Benz and the scooter people going in the night and leaving trash because it is not collected? It is also because possibly we don't want to hold it even a couple of more days. Our tolerance level is low. Is it possible to have that? How far has the corporation come with your effort? How much more is left to be done?
I think in terms of segregation at source, the fallout, it actually is a continuum. The points that you brought about, I segregate in my home, it's collected segregated, it is taken away segregated, and it is handled or processed segregated. That continuum, unfortunately, we have showcased it. We know it's possible. What we've not been able to achieve is the scale, where
Hmm.
we have a standard uniform rollout of that whole thing. And that part is to do with where the difficulties with the municipality start. In the various things that we talk about, always had an axe to grind about the fact that the job is outsourced, and there are contractors who are operating in the city, and these contractors are not really doing the job that they have to do in the way in which they have to do it. There were issues in the past where there were real issues for them in the past, that they were not being paid, they were not being paid adequately, it was not conforming to minimum wages, the compensation was not good enough. But I think those issues have been fixed over a period of time. It's the pricing of those services are good. There is adequate money being paid, and the BBMP itself has, I mean, many of us will remember how the city was brought to its knees, and we were reported in the New York Times, and there was trash accumulation everywhere. Why did that happen? Because contractors went on strike saying we will not collect, and that was because they were not being paid on time. So the BBMP really understood that it's critical for them to make those payments on time, and they have improved their systems, and they have done it. But the question still comes back to why is then that the system is still not working well, is because there is a fundamental issue with the concept of outsourcing, linked with the problem of the inherent problem of corruption, and linked with the problem of the weakness of BBMP as an organization to be able to roll this out. When we talk of Singapore, again, it's because of the strength of the authority there in being able to implement or enforce and roll out what they visualize and actually making it happen. Unfortunately, here we've not been able to see that strength in our municipality, and there are many reasons for it. It's because of the way the one of the big things that we have kind of highlighted constantly is the fact that in our journey as SWMRT, we have worked with close to 17 commissioners in the last, maybe more, I don't know, maybe I've lost track. In the last 15 years, we have worked with 17 to 20 commissioners. Why? Because their tenure is very short. Now, for like you said, I don't know much about waste management. You are in a different domain expertise. You're a IAS officer who has dealt with issues of administration or across various topics. You may not have had the opportunity to engage with SWM. Now, suddenly you're in a place where you have to deal with problem solving, setting up rules, SOPs, doing 100,000 things, budgeting, making sure that you're coping with the changes that are come in the space. In that short span of 1.5 years, are you going to be able to get that? Who's going to give you that compressed knowledge or module of knowledge where you hit the ground running and you're able to go? There's no one below you because they are also constantly getting transferred. If you look at the SWM structure, every officer, whether it's your junior health inspector or your assistant AEE or the assistant executive engineer or the EE executive engineer, every person is getting transferred and has a short tenure. Where's the expertise? When we say we are practitioners, we've had to break our head on it day in day out for a certain period of time, like you said, to achieve the ability to say, I compost, I do falana falana, I do. Why? Because I've been doing it day in and day out for years. Now to expect that a chap will just come in and do that office, sit in the role of a special commissioner SWM and understand it day one is a unrealistic thing. And who suffers? The city suffers because there's no continuity in decision making, there's no continuity in operations. There's no continuity in way it's personality driven. I understand the subject faster than you do. Okay, I work faster. The next officer who comes in is clueless. It takes 2 years for him to settle down. He's transferred by them. So we've had commissioners who've done great work. We've had an equal number of commissioners who've been complete failures because it just was too complex for them to figure it out, and their role ended before it even they had a chance to do something. So coming back to, therefore, the system of collection, their role has been key in making sure our contractors function. Our contractors have, fortunately or unfortunately, been the same chaps who are, there's a set of them who are operating in the city, but they've not had that level of management. It has been far short of what is needed. So, who will manage these contractors and get the job done? There's no one in the system who is able to do it. And aside from that, there have been constant improvements that are needed. That, like I said, if I segregate my waste, it has to be picked up, or collected in a segregated way. We've found roadblocks which we are facing after 15 years of being on the streets and fighting for this. We are still fighting the fundamental issue of wet has to be collected separately and dry has to be collected separately. Sanity has to be collected separately. If you're not going to do that, no force on earth can help us to process this waste. It will have to go to the landfill. So it has to just, it's a simple functionality of how do I send a vehicle which is either capable of collecting it in a separated way, or how do I send separate vehicles which will collect separate kinds of waste. That's all these civic bodies have to solve for. And unfortunately, caught in this mire of everything that I talked about, they have not been able to solve for it.
Why?
It's a combination of, like I said, inability because of lack of information. So I have to first convince the commissioner. The commissioner then has to apply his mind and be convinced that we are not vested bodies and that what we're saying is really a fact. Then he has to force other people to listen to him. And by the time he's able to get that down or translate it onto the ground through a tender or a legal document, his term is over. The next man goes through the same process. So the last contract that the city saw, actually, which the city started seeing a contracted system in 2000. It went on till about 2007. After 2007, we have never seen a real contract being executed in the city in the last 17 to 23, about 16 years.
No, I just want to bring the elephant in the room because you mentioned that. I don't think it is because it is vested body. A lot of things they listen to vested bodies. That is not actually. You guys are. You shouldn't be calling it vested bodies. You have put skin in the game. You have put money where the mouth is. But here's a question I want to ask. Two things. One is, will the Bangalore Waste Management Company setting up going to solve anything in this thing? And we all know that there is corruption. There are contractors who want these contracts, who are close to the local elected representatives, who pick up these contracts. At least I know of that. And if you acknowledge that, let us rather try and see how can we solve that problem. What do you think should be the reforms? Will the waste management company be useful in solving that problem? Unless you disagree with my premise of the elephant in the room.
The reason why we pushed for a body like, I mean, we had not visualized it as a waste management company, but we had talked about it as a body or an authority where it would solve for problems of being transferred, where we would have capacity building, where we would build expertise. We have the city is one of the few which boasts of 6, 7 SWM plants, and we have not been able to solve for the functioning of these composting plants because of lack of expertise. The which is not something which is too difficult to solve, right? I mean, if you are a company, you would just hire expertise, pay for it, and get the job done. But in the BBMP, you're expecting your in-house expertise of a mechanical engineer or a civil engineer being able to solve a composting plant issue. It's impossible. It's not going to happen. Plus, you transfer the guy out in 3 years. So, which is why we talked about creating a lasting organization where you will build capacity and expertise within that. Can you imagine your BWSSB linesman today suddenly being told, hey, dude, don't do this linesman job, you go and do something else? He will not know what you're talking about. The best com guy is the guy who fixes your junction boxes. Can you bring in somebody else to do that job? It's not possible. The BSNL has got a dedicated set of people who work on the phone lines, complex wiring, and all of that. It's the same thing with waste management. Why is it any different? So it has taken us this long for people to understand, hey, you need to build a dedicated set of guys who will be in this job and not move away. But the BSWML has been visualized for that purpose, but again, it has been a half-baked attempt to, it has not been fully empowered. The idea was to have a lateral movement of professionals who will come in, who will be equipped to handle the issues of waste management, which is not simple in nature. How do you do composting on scale? How do you do RDF management on scale? What is when somebody comes to you with a technology which talks about pyrolysis, which is a very high end technology? You should have the guy on the other side capable of understanding what pyrolysis is all about. Does it work for me as a city? What does it mean? Is the feasibility there? I need finance expertise, people who are able to study project reports. I need legal expertise, people who are able to drop tenders which do not go for litigation. All of you who have worked with BBMP will know that our eternal problem is litigation. Why? Because our contracts are not designed properly. So it needs a bunch of dedicated expertise to solve all these problems and to make it happen. Logistics. We came up with the idea of a micro plan. A micro plan is a very simple plan where a ward is broken up into a smaller unit. At that point, we had identified 750 homes as being a block. You then deploy as many vehicles as you have blocks. Your unit of management becomes a very small one where you only have to solve for, did this one auto go and collect from 3 crosses 3 main 750 houses? If he has done his job, you pay him. If he hasn't done his job, you don't pay him. If he turned up, you pay him. If he did not turn up, you don't pay him. You've now been able to micro identify the presence of the vehicle on the ground, which was not there earlier. Plus, we have the digital automation where you have a GPS concept. You can have an integrated, screen where you see all how difficult are all these? The Uber guys have solved for it. The Swiggy fellows and the Dunzo fellows who are operating on scooters have solved for it. So there is a lack of intent, there is a lack of expertise. You do not want to solve for it because it will bring in transparency. It will bring out the fact that, hey, you know what, there are 15 vehicles where you need 10 vehicles. There's an overpaying, 5 vehicles, money is going into someone's pocket. So because of the issue of the transparency that it will forcibly bring out, some vested interests have stopped it from happening. But we are suffering as a city because of that. So we've solved for a lot of these. It doesn't need solving for. All it needs is implementation. It needs governance. It needs administration. So we have realized over a period of time that what we are working for is not really solid waste management. It is to do with civic management. It's to do with public policy or public delivery of services, not to do with SWM. Actually, SWM is been solved for. We know what's to be done. What's not solved for is the municipality functioning, which all of you know is a gigantic issue. The BBMP Act and the metropolitan body, who's governing who, the ward sizes, the delimitation. Do you know how many houses are there in your city for you to plan for delivery? Is it 35 lakh houses, 55 lakh houses, 75 lakh houses? Are you following the 2011 census? Are you extrapolating? Have you done a mapping? How difficult are these problems to solve for in this day
No,
and age with automation where you have an Aadhaar card where every child has an Aadhaar card and they're counted for? Why are we still struggling with PID numbers and GIS? Why don't we have maps? Every person is accounted for, but for some reason a household is not accounted for. The BBMP is still struggling with knowing how many properties they have. So these are, you know,
Yeah.
larger issues which will only come with governance, political leadership, bagera bagera.
Hmm.
So we have now stopped talking about waste management, right? We are in a
Yeah.
different realm of subjects.
No, but that's an interesting point, right? I mean, all you have to do is ask Flipkart and Swiggy. They'll exactly tell you how much food and how many packages they have delivered, and even tell you where they delivered, which house they delivered, how much is the waste that they have themselves created, so you can go and pick it up. If you can do that, you will do that. Now, that comes back to this organizational structure. I understand that the government owes us for the tax it collects, garbage collection. But why aren't there more? I know it is contracted. I know there are private players who are actually doing the picking and the collections, but BBMP is just enabling these contracts. Is there a different way? I've always heard there is wealth in waste, there is money in waste. Every one of these things can be whatever recycled, repurposed, resold, and if that is so, why aren't we allowing the market to solve some of these problems to a certain? Of course there will always be, they will only pick up, for example, paper and plastic, and nobody picks up glass and clothes and things like that. But if we try to discover that as well, like you guys have, do you think involving more players who find value in this waste to do the job directly instead of this contracting method might be an option to consider?
Yes and no. Yes, because I mean no, because there is a entire set of citizenry who believe that, and bound through the municipal rules and regulations, that the waste is the matter of the city and can never be truly, they cannot be absolved with accountability of what happens to that waste. Also because of the fact that it is only the government which will keep a very large view on where waste is being and how it's being handled, because if it's mishandled, the repercussions or consequences of it are massive. I mean, we know that with tracts of land going bad, agricultural land getting spoiled because it is not being handled properly, the leachate coming and cattle dying, and its effect on So the consequences of it is not small. Similarly, if burning of plastics is allowed, there is emissions in the air, and if we entirely privatize it and allow for-profit entities to do it, very quickly we will find that they are doing it for the purpose of profit, and the planet suffers. Also, there is the problem of equity, which we talked about, that people, the waste pickers, will not be involved. There is another set of marginalized people who will lose their jobs. So the livelihoods part of it. So in that complex, Rubik's cube of things, there is a merit in the fact that this subject stays with the municipality and is not entirely privatized. Where it can be privatized, and where I think now there is a lot of clarity, is that technologies to deal with the end disposal of materials, given how complex materials are now becoming. Your Nike shoe is got about 70 different kinds of materials, and all composite in nature, which a regular driver's collection center cannot handle. At best, he can sort it out. A Coke bottle has got the PET, which is the bottle itself. The cap is a high value plastic. In that, there is a small piece of white layer that which
Yeah.
has to be removed. Then there is the label, which is a laminate paper. All have to be dealt with separately. So it's not easy. It's not simple. So there, the municipality cannot be expected to come up with the technologies to match what the FMCG companies are doing, who are spending crores on R&D to improve packaging. And it's unfair to expect that municipalities should have the technologies to deal with their
Yeah.
post consumer waste. You've generated the packaging as a producer. You are responsible for dealing with the post consumer waste that you have introduced into the market. So that's where we started also highlighting the concept of extended producer responsibility, where the work of the municipality should not be involving the complex management and disposal of certain kinds of materials. Composting is a definitely an easier thing to do, but look at biomethanation. It's again a complex technology issue. 10 years ago, when we started talking about biomethanation, it was gobar gas. But
Mm.
today it's slightly more advanced. We're talking of bio CNG. And it's difficult for us to expect that the municipality should be able to cope with that. And that's where privatization, our role of private operators, businesses which have to come and solve for these, cope with the changing materials, that's really their role and they have to stay with it. I think in the other roles, which is really a lesser technology intensive, the role of the municipality stays. They have to solve for it. They have to be able to find ways and means of cracking this whole earlier what we talked about, the logistics or the contracts which will stay out of courts, pay people on time, make sure the right kind of guys are hired. They have to solve for what we call as collection and transportation. So if
Mm.
you look at the journey of waste, there is compartments to it, though it's a continuum. The first part is segregation at source, which belongs to the realm of the generator. I, you, me, all of us as generators, a business, an institution, all of us are generators at various levels. We are responsible for the waste we generate. Either we choose to minimize it through more better ways. For instance, a cafeteria should switch over to reusable containers and not have paper cups. That is minimization. But that is in my control as a generator. And those are good things that I should be doing. So that is the box of segregation, minimization, all of that. And that's purely in the hands of the generator. Then comes the job of collection and transportation, which is a must do by the municipality. Nobody else can do it because of the complex nature of taxes, properties, collection of all of that. Then comes the processing and disposal, which is where private bodies are better suited. It's about waste management marrying the roles of all these three large sets of people and finding a set of ways to make sure that it works together. Fortunately, with our experiments in Bangalore, when we started off, we always like saying the story. When we started off, there was probably one composting, home composting product which was there in
Mm.
the market at that time. Apart from the DIY categories, there was one available. Dairy Dump was really an early entry into the
I
market
remember.
and they were there for a long time. Today, because of the fact that it's a demand and supply, and a lot of people just got passionate about it and entered into it to solve for there are, I would think, about 35, 40 real products which we have also tried to showcase and promote so that people become more aware of it. There's been a very nice introduction of the inoculum, which was
Mm.
earlier just some chemical powder and nobody knew how it worked, which is why composting fails because they didn't do it right. They couldn't solve for browns because you have to go running behind dry leaves and bring it. And if you don't put browns with your greens, then that's what the formula says. Then your composting will fail. But in the urban setup, how do we solve for it?
Mm.
Came the block. It was a cute the compost manufacturers were able to come up with this really neat idea of a coco peat which will be inoculated with the bioinoculum necessary for composting. It's available in a packaged way. You can buy it off Big Basket, Amazon, vagera vagera. Those have been the amazing changes that have happened because we've had private sector coming into it. They've solved for convenience. They've solved for pricing, affordability, availability, all of that. But there are some parts that the municipality has to continue doing, and we cannot solve for it. We
Yeah.
shouldn't be solving for it. They have to do it.
On that note, I'd like to thank you for coming on the show. It's been extremely illuminating for me. I face the same challenges everybody else does, and understanding the depth of issues here And very glad to hear that there are people solving for some problems that weren't there earlier. 10 years ago, we wouldn't think we would have been this far. We wouldn't think you could buy all these things off of Amazon. That's what this has created. It has created entrepreneurs. It has created change in thinking. It has created a new waste management company. It has created new products in the market. I think this is the most successful incubator I know of in my city, and nobody even talks about it. Right. So, on that note, I'd like to thank you once again, Sandhya, for coming on the show and
Thank you
shining
so
the light.
much. It was
No,
my pleasure. Thank you so much. The
yeah,
more people understand it, hopefully the behaviors will also change.
I think so. And that's the hope we have. Just a reminder to everybody to like, subscribe, and share this video so we can bring more interesting guests like Sandhya to you. See you all next week. Bye bye.